Hello, hello. All right, no bingo, no speed round. This is gonna be a saga. This is a journey.
It is indeed.
Hi guys, my name is Benjamin Felix. I'm the CMO over at Stackline, retail intelligence, connected commerce platform, all of those wonderful buzzwords that you guys heard in the earlier session. Yes, and I'm joined by Michael. Michael.
Hello, everyone. Michael Craig, Senior Director, Global Marketing with Harman International, overseeing brand strategy and creative development for JBL, for Harman Kardon, and for our new gaming line, or newish gaming line, JBL Quantum. Happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So when we were doing this pre-work, and I don't know if you guys know, but Brand Innovators says, hey, get together so it's not super awkward when you jump on stage. And as we were starting to discuss, it was, your story is a little bit of like you're encapsulating both your previous roles into kind of identifying this big, huge challenge, and it's identifying like a core new audience, and then how you put it into practice, and what were the learnings and the pitfalls, and we were equating it to like a Tolkien novel, right?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about the background, tell us about the challenge, and let's open that book.
Absolutely. So I joined Harman a little over 3 years ago, and I think pretty early out of the gate, I knew that JBL was a brand that I had some exposure to. I knew the category that it operated within, but I really felt like it was missing some depth in terms of how it was connecting with consumers. And so we started having some internal conversations about where the brand was rooted, where it was grounded, and ultimately how we landed in the place that we were at the point when I showed up. And what I found out was that we hadn't actually talked to our young consumers in about 8 or 9 years. So the consumers that we were focusing on were not young anymore, right? So our target was the same, but the people who actually occupied that space were not the same people. And so I immediately started to nudge our insights team to say, hey, we should probably start to re-engage in that conversation. And really do the work of understanding what is new, what is different, what is actually driving the 18 to 24-year-olds of 2020 versus the ones that everything that we were doing was built around. And I came into this as a strong believer in the power of insights. I was telling Ben that prior to joining Harman, I was a part of the launch of Bubbly Sparkling Water. And Bubbly was an interesting case because it came after 6 or 7 failed attempts of the company trying to launch a sparkling water and getting to the place of people just aren't interested in sparkling water. And we're having that conversation as LaCroix is just blowing up in our face. And so you can't tell yourself that story with a straight face and kind of allow that to go. And so what we ended up doing in that case was going to talk to consumers, truly understanding the need, truly understanding who we're talking to, and then building that out. And so up on that success, I really, kind of rode that religious wave of insights into Harman and said, no, we need to stop, we need to pause, we need to have these conversations and understand how do we build the brand into the one that we want it to be.
So talk a little bit about that, because oftentimes, people or brands don't change unless there's like a critical kind of moment of conflict. What was that moment?
So we were in a meeting, and our business was actually on fire, Portable specifically, but no one could say why we were winning. And when you don't know why you're winning, then that means you are potentially set up for a loss at some point in the near future. And so that was a bit of a troubling conversation, but one that allowed me the leverage to kind of push on this insights bit a bit further to say we really need to understand our lovers. How do they become lovers? The ones that are in the category but are not considering us, how do we ultimately win them over? And from that platform, we were able to jump off into the insights work.
So let's talk about that process, right? So you just said go. Who was involved? Who was in the room? Who did you bring to the table? How did that kind of start?
So it was our head of insights. It was our CMO. It was my boss at the time, the global leader of marketing, and all of our regional partners as well, because we wanted to make sure, again, in the role that I am in, overseeing everything that's happening across all of our regions, that what's happening with our consumers in all of the regions are actually being represented in the work that we're doing, and we didn't want to do that without the assistance of the folks that were ultimately going to be the clients of this work. And so essentially everyone that would likely have an opinion about how it turned out, we wanted to engage them up front.
That's smart. So let's talk about the insights themselves. What was the thing that you were looking to learn, like specifically?
Just really understanding what were the key drivers within our category. A number of times, especially when there's a new kind of buzz generation jumping into the marketplace, in this case being Gen Z, there are always a number of articles and stories that you can read and understand about what's important to them. But what those articles generally don't do is allow you to understand what is the overlap between what's important to them and what is actually relevant for you within your specific category. And so the work is understanding what's happening with the consumers, but also dragging that and pulling that all the way in to your brand ethos and making sure there's some level of connectivity there that you can then continue to build your brand from.
So how important is it to really understand the competition, right? How critical is that when you're talking about insights, talking about your brand?
It's of paramount importance, because what you want to make sure that you're doing is not going into a space that is already occupied by someone else. And I think it was actually one of the issues that we had run into historically, which was, hey, we compete with Beats. Beats is cool. We want to be cool. They have NBA players. We should go get NBA players. And when you run your marketing plan in that way, you generally, the best that you can be is second best within that category. And so in order to actually step around, you need to understand what is that unique difference, what is that unique selling proposition that you have that you can actually bring to the table. And for us, we thought it was really our legacy in music. So people don't know JBL. People don't know that JBL has actually been around for 75 plus years. People don't know that JBL is the sound of the Super Bowl halftime show, the Grammys, the Emmys, like SoFi Stadium, like all of these places where Nestle, like JBL is essentially everywhere, but we weren't doing a good job of like really building our credibility and sound by telling that story. And so that was a unique space that we could occupy. We just needed to figure out how could we ground it in what was important for Gen Z consumers.
So the Gen Z were you saying at first, we need to connect with Gen Z, or was it, we need to connect with somebody and and by the way, look who it is, it's Gen Z.
No, so we always envisioned ourselves a youthful brand, as most brands like to be. But there was a pure disconnect in terms of how we were coming to life, and even some of the things that were being played back to us as we started even our qualitative work within this insights journey. And so when you start to hear people play back to you like, oh yeah, I just went to your website, it gives me Radio Shack vibes. No, it was painful. It was tough. I very rarely wanted to walk out of a focus group or walk into the door of a focus group. But I maintained my seat. But the truth was there, right? So when people are telling you that truth, you have to cry a little bit, then accept it and figure out how you're going to move forward. And that's what we ultimately ended up doing.
So you talked about qualitative. Talk to me about, you did focus groups. What else? What other insights? What were the other methods or channels that you leveraged? Yeah,
so we started off with qualitative research in 6 or 7 different markets across the globe, just to understand what was the current perception of our brand in comparison to others within the category. What were some of the things that were important to listening environments, listening experiences, what were consumers looking for within this category that we could potentially build from. And so we started there, and then from that we were able to hone in on a few key insights, a few key topics, but we needed to go deeper. So in those same markets, we ended up coming back with quantitative research just to verify some of the things that we thought that we heard, but really helping to build out the data around those points. And then we actually finished it out with another round of qualitative research to say, hey, now we've landed on a few potential concepts. Do these make sense? Do these fit where you think that this brand should go, and kind of help to sharpen it from there?
So how did they feel? How does this feel to you?
Exactly.
So you got to the point, you've collected the data, you've got these insights, you've got these key topics. What were the topics? What were the findings? What was the learning?
It was the thing that actually got me was how much this generation actually cares to be connected to whom they are, like who they actually are as individuals, and how a lot of them utilize music in ways that are actually different than previous generations. So in previous generations, it was more about, hey, I listen to this song to express how I feel. Like, I feel sad, I listen to this sad song, or I want to be happy, so I listen to this happy song. They were actually listening to music to help them to process how they were experiencing, like how they were actually taking in what was happening in life. And so that provides you a different way in, a different way to actually connect and think about the role that you're playing in consumers' lives. Because at that point, it's not just about sound quality. It's not just about lack of distortion. It's really about an emotional connection and what we're actually enabling in doing that. But what it also allowed us to do is break away from this kind of self-aggrandizing role that we were trying to play in consumers' lives. A lot of our advertising was really bright and shiny and saccharine. It's, hey, like, I have a waterproof speaker and I'm gonna jump into the pool. I'm so happy because I have the speaker, and it's like, a lot of just vapid elation that just wasn't true to how people were feeling and the role that our products were actually playing in those consumers' lives. And so it's not about us, it's really about how we allow you to connect to the thing that you really care about, that thing that you really love, which is that content, which is that music, your favorite podcast, whatever those things are. And so by taking a step back, I think it broadened our stage and allowed us to play a real role in their lives.
So I think it's divergent, because when you think about tech, normally the proclivity of tech companies and sometimes software companies is to talk about features and benefits and look at how sexy this thing looks, and sometimes, yeah, that's a persona that appeals there. What you're talking about is removing that specifically, more akin to, I don't know if you notice a hotel ever being advertised, but they never show the hotel room, right? They show the place that you were at, the place you were visiting. And in that way, it's somewhat similar. Talk to me about how that was received inside a 75-year-old plus brand.
It is still being received. It is still an ongoing conversation, right? I mean, we have an amazing team of engineers, of sound quality engineers, and they put in a lot of amazing work to make the products that we sell. And we never want to shortchange the work that they're doing to create those products, but we also want to make sure that we're packaging them in a way that actually makes it exciting. It's great that we can move from IPX7 waterproof to IPX8 waterproof, and so now you can go from 1 meter to 3 meters. But who cares? Like, it's one of those things, and so it makes sense in the spaces where it makes sense, and we make sure that when those stories need to be told and when we need to add the depth to the product stories, we make sure that we find the place to do that. But in a lot of cases, like, that's not necessarily your full-on brand campaign.
That's awesome. So you've got this deliverable. What format? Like, how is this? Like, how did this culminate into this final package of insightful insights, if you will?
Yes. So the way it came to us was an overview, a brand narrative that really took us back to our ethos and told that story of where we came from to where we are today and the role that we are hoping to play within our consumers' lives. And so talking about the 75 plus years, talking about the removal of distortion, but then also putting that against the backdrop of what today's consumer is looking for, and drawing the analogy between what we have done from a product perspective to what we can do in the lives of our consumers in terms of removing that distortion, in terms of allowing you to feel and operate as your unfiltered self. And so in overlaying those two things, again, we landed in a place of, I think we're onto something that we can really build and grow from, and then we needed to figure out how to bring it to life.
So, I mean, I think we have a clip, right?
We do, and I have a couple of pages that kind of showcase a bit of the story in terms of where we landed specifically. So I won't drain all of these, but I feel naked if I show up without a deck, and so there's one here.
Security blanket.
Yeah, in terms of like where we landed from a brand positioning standpoint, it's, JBL connects you to the voices that make you feel understood with unrestricted and democratized audio, so you feel confident to be your unfiltered true self. And again, if you move from a place of, hey, it's about this, it's about the thing, to it's about you, it allows you to tell stories in a much richer way. And so when we got into the actual creative campaign, I won't drain all of this, but again, it's going back to how Gen Z is actually moving through life, how they value how everything around them is ever evolving, they are ever evolving, and they actually find moments of joy within that evolution. And the campaign idea that we landed on was called Dare To, and it worked for us on a couple of different fronts. First of all, our tagline had been for the previous 9 years, Dare to Listen. But when it was originally thought of, it was really about, dare to listen to this amazing sound. It was very on the nose in terms of the category that we were a part of. And so as we got into this process, we actually knew that the tagline was the one thing that was definitely going to change, because, hey, you don't go do a brand positioning and do all of the work and spend the money and end up with a tagline that is exactly the same. But what we found is, in that last round of qualitative research, once we took them through the concepts and the way that we were evolving, the way that the brand was coming to life, Dare To took on a different meaning. Dare to Listen took on a different space for those consumers. So it was more about dare to listen to your inner voice, dare to listen to the folks around you that you love, dare to listen to those things that are actually really important to you. And so, to my own chagrin, I was ready to kick it out, but we had to let it stay, and I'm actually happy that we did.
That's awesome. That's great. Do we have a video?
We do. We have 2 videos actually, because I couldn't decide which one to show.
This is your moment to dare to strut, to self-care, or not care. Dare to turn up and unwind and try again and again. Because when you dare to live your truth, you dare the world to listen.
And then one more.
Yeah, and remember the part she was like, if you go to church, get into ya. If she ain't got a butt, get into ya.
Get into it again and again with JBL.
Got that big rocket launcher.
I love Doja Cat. But we're talking about the journey, right? And I'm going to be honest with you. In recent conversations, as recent as last night, we're talking about, did we go far enough? The campaign is called Dare To, and what we showcased here even didn't feel daring to us. There are old habits that we still have in terms of, hey, it's music, so everybody should be happy, right? Everybody should always be having a good time when music is involved. And the story that I relayed to my team, and I think we're friends here, so I'll relay it to you as well, is when we talk about, we've always talked about joy, and it always showed up in a very kind of fake way, but like it's imposed smiles, like you weren't really happy before the camera turned on, those kind of things. And I was looking for an example to kind of help to redefine joy and like what that actually means. And so my mother passed away around 10 years ago, and which is a tough time. I won't lie about it. But my one of my best friends lost his father like 3 weeks ago, and so because we've been friends since childhood, he was actually at my mother's funeral. He called me the night before he had to give a speech at his father's funeral, and he said, "Hey, I saw you did this, 10 years ago. Like it seemed really tough for you, but you were able to get through it. Like how were you able to like muster the strength and like actually live in that moment?" And I told him that what I did the night before I had to speak was like actually listened to one of my mother's favorite songs, right? And so in that moment, like I felt connected to like not just the moment that we were living in, but like actually the person that I actually loved and like the memories that helped to evoke, and how music actually built that bridge for me within that very tough moment. There is joy in music for me in that space that is not the concert, that's not the pool party, that's not those things that we were always showcasing. There's a whole bouquet of emotions that we have access to, and we've been carving out this one small slice, which is party time, right? But like people lean into music for so many other things. And the challenge for us is like, how do we break away from some of those old habits and feeling like, hey, when you watch our content, you need to feel just this one way about this one slice. And how do we start to really open ourselves up to the rest of that bouquet? And so in talking through it in that way and thinking about moments in my own life where music actually made an impact, it helped us to broaden the spectrum and really reminded us that there's still a lot of work to be done and the journey's not over.
Yeah, it's well said. I don't know how to follow up on that. That's really, really good.
Come on, go back to your list.
Oh, no, I know. I have my notes. All right. Sorry. So you're still on the journey. So we're all friends here, right? Let's talk about the learnings, right? Not just the friends we made along the way.
Right.
But talk about, if you were to talk to other brand leaders that are thinking about this, what were some pitfalls or maybe missteps that you wish, man, I now noticed I'd stepped that?
Yeah. So I think that the initial inclination is to not do the work, right? It's, hey, there's all of this information available about whatever target it is that you're looking to go after. Let's just go look at this, secondary data. There's enough out there. We can pull from it what we think makes sense to us, and then just go out and write the story in that way. And the pitfalls there are tremendous. I mean, again, it goes back to my pre-bubbly story of, hey, no one loved sparkling water, except everybody was starting to love sparkling water, like all of them but ours, right? And so you actually have to go and challenge yourself to do the work and actually push forward in that way. And then the other thing is make sure that, again, the people you will need to lean on to bring this to life are going on the journey with you. And so it's not, hey, I'm going to disappear into this dark room and come back 6 months later, 9 months later with a brand new brand positioning. It's like, no, I'm going to take you on the steps along the way. I'm going to tell you where I think we're closing in. I'm going to tell you where I think the gaps still are. I'm going to allow you to input into that process. And so when it's done, it's not just this thing that I did. It's this thing that we built together that we now feel confident is going to help us go to the next level. Yeah, and
I think a lot with that, people oftentimes kind of present a false narrative, like, oh yeah, no, we know exactly where we're going. Exactly. I got this. We got this. And it's like, well, no, we know what we're going to try to do.
Right.
And I think being honest with yourself and your peers throughout that process, I think is ultimately super critical.
Absolutely.
So if you were to do anything differently, what would you do so far?
So I think the last batch of creative, I mean, I was...
Go further, go bigger.
I take ownership of where it landed. And because I take ownership, I also recognize that, in that room, that's the time to challenge and say, hey, this is different. It's not different enough. Like we pushed, but we haven't pushed far enough. And part of it is, again, because I know that it's a journey and I know that it represents a change. You also need to make sure you don't jump out so far that you've left the entire organization behind. Because then I might be here with my resume instead of here talking about a relatively successful story. But again, it's recognizing that even when you think that you've pushed, there's probably still more that you can do. And continue to find how you do that.
So I have one final question before we open up for Q&A. Do you feel a sense of some kind of sense of accomplishment or closure when you went through this journey?
Yes and no. I mean, I love how much closer we've gotten to where young people are these days. But again, like you look at it and you recognize that there's still more that we could potentially do. The other thing that we're looking at is how do we activate this? How does this come to life in kind of experiential and real life events? Like how do we take that thing that I talked about and then bottle it up and make it real for people who are looking to experience your brand in a new way?
Yeah, and we talked about how do you then get it to the performance teams and bridge the gap into not just pretty pictures, but also bottom line impact. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that part of it is actually starting to play itself out now. So in this category, if you're not a part of the consideration set when people go in to make the purchase, you probably have already lost, because once they're on Apple's site, it's a wrap. And so I need to make sure that they're thinking about me before they sit down or pull out their phone or however they're shopping, because if I'm not being considered, it's over.
Yeah, if you're not first or second, you're last.
Yes.
So let's open up Q&A. Oh, damn.
Justin, get moving. Thomas.
Hi, thank you. Amazing presentation. Loved it. One question: how do you manage the portfolio of brands you have between like JBL and Harman Kardon? How do you minimize the overlaps between your brands?
It is a challenge, and especially in a space where budgets are always, being challenged and being pressured. But what we're starting to do now, in terms of understanding who the actual consumers are for each of those brands, and making sure that we're creating the products that are actually speaking to those pockets of, our target consumer, and making sure there's enough distance between them that we can claim real separation, but also taking a look at, hey, for this 18 or 24-year-old today that is potentially going to be making more money 5 years from now, how do I usher them into that next level of sound? How do I get them prepared to move into Harman Kardon or to Mark Levinson, 5 or 10 years after that? And so it's a journey that we are currently on, but a lot of it starts, again, from understanding who each of those pockets of consumers are and making sure that you're building out the portfolio in a way that allows you to claim realistic separation and overlap where necessary.
Great.
Hi, I was just wondering, with the product experience being so important in driving adoption and so many people moving online and obviously competing with Apple, which is a daunting task, how are you getting people to discover your brand and really drive that affinity given all the things you're up against?
For us, the challenge is just showing up in more places. What we've also found is in doing just kind of head-to-head product testing, a lot of the functionality is exactly the same. Like you read our package, and what our products do are very similar to what other products do within the category. So the challenge is just, again, getting you to try us, because once you try us, you'll realize that in a lot of cases that sound experience is actually much better because it's what we do. But if you're not thinking about me, if I'm not on the list, it's just not going to happen.
I will get over there, I promise.
Hi, Joey here. So first of all, this was so fun to watch, and I'm like super inspired. But my question is, when we think about the emotion, like I love that you have decided to go from functional to emotional and sort of how you speak to the consumer. Thinking about like those deeper emotions and why brands don't typically associate themselves with negative emotions, like how do we retell that story? Like I know you're kind of hitting at that, but I'm personally curious, like how do we unlearn that sadness is a negative emotion?
And this is one that the insights actually helped me to stand out on this one, because when I read the insight that our consumers are actually utilizing music to help them to like process life, like that's not just happy, right? When you're processing life, sometimes it's happy, and if it's happy for you 100% of the time, man, I want to trade places with you. But for most people, like that's not what it is. And so what our consumers are telling us is, hey, like I'm listening to music to do all of these things, and you're talking to me about this one place. And if we can find a way to tell the other stories, we're likely going to be standing out in that space alone, which is going to then allow us to really stand out in terms of our competitive set.
So I love the story of this whole journey you guys have been on, and Nestle has some long-established brands as well that I think are in similar positions. So when you're trying to tap into like a growth segment or a younger cohort or something, I feel like there's a couple ways you can do it. You can innovate to them, you can structure your comms or your media channels towards them, or you can do like a whole rebranding. How did you land on the correct balance or strategy for JBL?
Yeah, I think that the key there is balance, because we're never going to stop innovating. We're probably not going to stop, doing marketing and talking to consumers. So how do we make sure that, again, we're keeping up with them in terms of their actual functional needs, but we're then talking to them about it in a way that can actually resonate with them. And so, again, like we didn't start making brand new speakers, once we finished this work. We just kind of reminded them that, hey, the speaker that you already own, the one that you're already in the market for, can now serve a slightly different purpose for you, and one that's going to actually resonate with you because you told us about it.